For years, the current administration has been ignoring the reality by proposing a new set of emission standards and rules that would lead to lower emissions and massive electrification. Well, that's not going to happen because the government finally decided to make a revision to the plan and bring up new, looser rules and requirements. The reasons are various, so stay with us to find out what were the 7 factors that affected Biden's decision to cave to the pressure from automakers and car owners to slow down from EVs. Number 7. The plan was too optimistic. Back in April 2023, the EPA came up with a new proposal for gas emission standards that would lead to a significant reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. The idea was to set higher requirements for emissions, which would force legacy car makers to decrease the offer of internal combustion engines and focus more on EVs. It may sound like a noble idea to save the planet, but the problem was with the time frame. Namely, the EPA wanted to impose pretty aggressive rules that would force electrification in an unrealistically short period. The idea was to make 60% of all new vehicles electric by 2030 and 2/3 by 2032. The moment the plan was announced, car makers, experts, and the general public raised suspicion about the plan, often describing it as nothing more than wishful thinking. It was pretty obvious from the start that EPA and Biden's administration would have to revise the plan and come up with something more realistic. Eventually, this happened, as the latest report suggests a new watered-down EPA proposal that suggests 50% of new vehicles to be electrified by 2030. Some people may say that even this proposal is too optimistic, considering that EVs currently take less than 8% of the US market, but some experts point out that this number actually refers to all electrified vehicles, meaning that this 50% includes not just electric, but hybrid and plug-in hybrid vehicles as well. And with the recent growth of the popularity of hybrids, such a plan may actually work. Number 6. EVs are slowing down. To make a plan work, you need to be realistic, and from today's perspective, it's obvious that projections of the EV market growth weren't particularly realistic. The market is still growing at a respectable speed, but nowhere near the expected. While the last several years were characterized by a pretty impressive 90% year-over-year growth, the last year brought a significant slowdown. It started pretty well, but the second half was a completely different story. The growth in the third quarter was 58%, while the last quarter brought a quite substantial drop. As a result, the EV market share in 2023 remained under 8%. According to some sources, it was around 7.6%, which is way below the initial estimation that electric cars would account for 10% of all new cars sold in 2023. With such dynamics, it became obvious that there's no chance EVs would jump to 60% in just 6 years. It was time for a punch from reality, which came in the form of the plan's revisions. Number 5. Union and the upcoming elections. We could talk about noble causes all day long, but in the end, it all comes down to politics. And with the presidential elections scheduled for November, it's time for special measures. It's time to save every possible voice because it all indicates that this is going to be a pretty tight race. Both candidates, Biden and Trump, have solid chances of winning, so it's essential to play smart on this important topic. The public is divided when it comes to the environmental benefits of electric cars and electrification, so both candidates focused on specific groups to gain new votes and retain the old ones. Speaking of retaining, we cannot neglect the union. Back in September, Biden gave full support to workers during the UAW strike. In return, the union supports Biden, but these 150,000 votes are anything but guaranteed. And with the struggle legacy car makers are having with electrification, which inevitably leads to a significantly increased risk of losing jobs, we're pretty sure that the UAW and its stance toward electric cars also played a very important role in Biden's decision to revise the EPA's proposal. Number 4. Struggle of legacy automakers. Naturally, union issues lead us to the problem automakers are having with electrification. You've probably already heard so many stories about American car makers like Ford and GM and their struggle with electrification. These companies have been investing billions in EVs in the last several years, but they're still nowhere near the point of producing electric vehicles in high volumes. Moreover, none of these automakers have figured out how to make money from electric cars yet. Instead of making a profit, legacy car makers are losing money on every EV they sell. For example, Ford has been losing over $36,000 on every F-150 Lightning it sold in the last year, and the total loss was actually so big that the Blue Oval Company was forced to cut the production of this model by half and delay $12 billion of EV investments in order to save capital. The same is true with General Motors. This car maker already pushed the production of the all-electric Silverado to 2025 and also postponed the production of a new electric drive unit for the same reasons. So, in a set of circumstances where car makers are delaying EV investments, it didn't make any sense to push EPA's super strict proposal. That would lead to further losses, as some experts estimated legacy car makers would be forced to pay between $14 and $16 billion in fines due to their inability to meet high-emission standards, which once again leads to the UAW issues and vulnerability of thousands of jobs. Number 3. Infrastructural readiness. EV infrastructure is another thing that comes to mind. It appears that the government also realized that some actions need to be taken from its side as well. With the current infrastructure that can't even cover the current number of EVs, it's obvious that Biden's administration would have to invest billions in charging stations. We presume it can make thousands of them in the next several years, but can it really keep up with the initially planned growth? Is it possible to build enough stations to feed 10 million vehicles by 2032? We don't think so, and it looks like the government doesn't think so either. But even with a sufficient number, no one can guarantee smooth and convenient charging and overall EV ownership. We already witnessed numerous problems with public chargers over the last few years, starting from Electrify America stations. It turned out that, according to one research, only 72.5% of its chargers were operative in the San Francisco Bay Area over the last year. JD Power pointed out that every fifth attempt at charging ended unsuccessful in the last year, and with the significant increase in the number of public chargers, we could only expect even more issues like these. Number 2. Rivals may not be advancing as we thought. EV enthusiasts often like to point out how it's important to keep up pace with Europe and China in terms of EV development. Many of them believe that if American companies continue with what they call slow EV technology development, America could soon become inferior. It's no secret that Chinese EV technology has been developing fast over the last decade, but are things really as great as some say? Well, the latest reports suggest that things in China are far from ideal. Instead of 500 EV makers operating in 2019, today's industry counts to no more than 90. Moreover, at least one-third of them produce in minor numbers and will most likely go into bankruptcy this year. Practically, BYD is the only EV maker from China that makes a profit on electric cars. A few more major manufacturers like Geely and MG may survive, while the rest will most likely end their businesses in the near future. Could the Chinese EV industry continue at the same pace with just a few EV makers left in the business? It can't, and in such a set of circumstances, American legacy automakers really don't have a reason to panic. We're pretty sure they can continue with development at a natural pace, waiting for the consumers to shape the market. Number 1. Most Americans don't want EVs. Speaking of consumers, Americans are still not ready to embrace the new technology, at least most of them. The phase of early adopters and wealthy households getting EVs has ended, and we're now witnessing big resistance from the middle class. Simply, for an average American, buying an EV still isn't a payable investment. EV prices are still high, and there aren't many benefits that they're getting in return. As mentioned, the infrastructure is still far from ideal, while the latest reports also suggest big reliability issues of electric vehicles. The latest studies show that EVs are 80% less reliable than gas-powered cars. All this creates a chain reaction in the way that other owning expenses go up as well. The average repair cost is much higher in the case of EVs, and consequently, the insurance premiums are much higher as well. Then there's the used car market, which brings a lot of questions, especially once the battery is out of warranty. But above all, Americans are still not ready to change their lifestyles. They're not willing to pay premium prices if they have to waste their time at charging stations or have to carefully plan frequent pit stops on long journeys. Finally, they're not convinced with the performance of all-electric pickups and SUVs, the favorite types of vehicles in America, because batteries tend to drain out much quicker in the case of towing, hauling, or any other kind of heavy exploitation. To put it in simple words, EVs have to improve a lot before the masses accept it. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.